Tonight, you re-not doom-scrolling ancient proof videos or picking sides in a comet war you didn't start. Tonight, you're walking into Dendera the slow way close enough to feel the air change at the doorway, close enough to hear a torch sputter like it's trying to remember its own courage, close enough to notice limestone breathing coolness back at you as if the temple has been saving its quiet for centuries. Before you fall asleep, you will step into a chamber that feels like a secret, not because it's hiding a gadget, but because it was built to make your voice shrink. You'll meet the relief everyone keeps calling a bulb, an oval enclosure, a serpent-like line inside it, a pillar-like support beneath an image so familiar to modern eyes that it keeps starting arguments on contact. And you will watch the real trick unfold. How a symbol can turn into a machine in your mind, and how a machine can turn back into a myth when you finally stop trying to win the picture. 3 small senses to keep you company. A torch sputters and then steadies, as if it decides to behave. A chisel mark catches the light and lets it go like a tiny blink. And somewhere in the stone, the cool air holds still, patient as a held breath. If your breathing wants to follow that patience perfect, inhale 4, exhale 6. If nights like this help you unwind, you can subscribe only if you want more quiet history where the mystery isn't shouted, it's carried. And if you leave a comment telling me where and what time you're listening from, I'll picture that same soft torchlight reaching you, wherever you are, as we step deeper into the argument carved in stone. Because tonight's story doesn't begin with a revelation. It begins with a room that teaches you to whisper, and a single carved shape that refuses to stop looking like something it isolates until you learn how to look again. You step into Dendera's darker spaces, and the first thing you notice is not an image, not a symbol, not even a mystery. The first thing you notice is the air. It changes in the doorway, the way water changes temperature when you move from sun to shade. It feels cooler, denser, like it has been saving itself for you. Like it has been waiting politely behind stone for a long time, and isn't sure whether to greet you or simply continue being quiet. The limestone seems to breathe it out, slowly, patiently, as if the walls have lungs made of mineral and time. If you've ever put your palm on a cold stone and felt the chill travel up your fingers, you already understand the mood. Nothing rushes in here. Even your own footsteps sound as if they've been asked to remove their shoes at the door. And you do instinctively, even if you don't actually have shoes to remove. Your voice, if you try to use it, drops without being told. Your mouth shapes words smaller. It's an odd reflex, the way humans respond to enclosed ancient spaces. We start acting as if the room has ears. It probably does, in its own limestone way. The walls have held prayers, arguments, boredom, sweat, dust, and the soft grind of sandals for centuries. They can hold your presence too, without commentary. A torch sputters somewhere in your imagination, because chambers like this almost demand torchlight. Not for drama, not for danger, but for simple practicality. The light is low, and your eyes need a moment to become useful. In the half-dark, the stone doesn't look flat. It looks layered. It looks like someone wrote on it with depth instead of ink-careful strokes pressed into the surface, lines that catch the light and let it go. There is a faint scent that isn't exactly smell, and isn't exactly absence of smell, but something in between. Cool mineral, old dust, the memory of smoke that has long since stopped being smoke. If you've ever opened an old book and smelled paper in time, it's like that, except the pages are walls and the binding is architecture. The corridor feels close in the way a secret feels close, not threatening, just intimate. The ceiling is near enough to make you aware of your own height. The walls are close enough that your shoulders know they could touch stone if they leaned. Space becomes precious. Space becomes deliberate. You can almost feel the logic behind it. If you want a place to mean something, you make it narrower, darker, harder to enter. Mystery loves a tight hallway the way cats love a cardboard box. And then slowly your eyes begin to adjust. At first, everything is a gentle blur of shapes and shadows. Reliefs run along the walls like sentences you can't read, yet lines, curves, figures, a constant quiet grammar. The human brain wants to translate immediately. It wants to label. It wants to say, this is a god, this is a symbol, this is a decorative border, as if naming things will make the room less old and therefore less serious. But the chamber doesn't cooperate with rushing. The chamber insists you take your time. It has waited too long to be skimmed. So you let your gaze move like a slow hand across a textured surface. You watch how the torchlight reel or imagined slides over curved grooves. You notice that some lines are sharper, some softened by touch or time. Some corners still carry the crispness of a chisel's decision. Other corners have been rounded by centuries of air, the way a river rounds stones without ever raising its voice. It's surprisingly soothing to be forced into this pace. Out in the bright world, your eyes jump from one thing to the next as if they're late for an appointment, and here they settle. They linger. They learn to look the way ancient spaces prefer to be looked at, slowly, repeatedly, almost lazily, as if you have all night and nothing else to do. The reliefs are everywhere, and yet they don't shout for attention. They wait. They're patient. Like people who don't need to introduce themselves because they've already been here longer than your entire life. Figures emerge from the dimness, profiles, headdresses, hands raised in gestures that are both specific and timeless. There are lines of hieroglyphs that feel like a woven band-tight continuous, a kind of visual humming. Even if you can't read them, you can feel their rhythm. Repetition has its own comfort. And Egyptian art loves repetition the way sleep loves steady breathing. You take another step, and your footfall sounds softer now, as if the air is patting it. The room's acoustics turn sound into cloth. A cough would feel rude. A laugh would feel possible, but you'd probably cover it with your hand like someone laughing in a library. There's something mildly funny about how quickly you become polite in ancient stone. You might not behave this respectfully in your own kitchen, but give you a sacred corridor, and suddenly you're the world's gentlest human, tiptoeing like an apology. And still, nothing announces itself as a mystery. That's important. The chamber isn't covered in signs that say, please be intrigued. It simply exists, layered and dense, and it lets your mind do what minds do, wonder. Wonder is easier when the room is quiet enough to hear yourself thinking. You notice small practical details that make the space feel real rather than theatrical. Little chips where stone is flaked. Tiny pits where the surface isn't perfect. Soot darkening in places where lamps once worked hard. In the corners, shadow sits thickly, not hiding anything dramatic, just doing its job as shadow. Your eyes keep returning to the lines because lines are how humans hold meaning when words are not available. And then you notice the way the reliefs are placed. Some scenes feel like they are meant to be seen quickly at a glance as you pass. Others feel like they demand you stop. The carver's emphasis is not even. Some panels have a gravity that doesn't come from size alone. They feel weighted, like the stone itself is leaning slightly toward them, as if it knows these sections will become the ones people talk about. You move deeper, and the chamber tightens its mood. The sense of being inside increases. Outside becomes a concept you no longer need. The modern world phones, clocks, bright screens, the strange pressure to have opinions quickly falls away without argument. Here, the only pressure is literal. Cool stone, closed space, the gentle insistence of time. If you want, you can imagine the people who would have used these spaces. Not in a cinematic way, with dramatic music and swirling robes, but in a practical way. Priests moving carefully with lamps, reading by touch and memory as much as by sight. Temple workers doing their jobs with the steady boredom of people who have done something 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. The sacred is often less theatrical than we like to pretend. It can be routine, precise, quietly repetitive. That routine leaves its mark on stone less in scratches than in the confidence of the imagery, the sense that this place had a purpose and did not need to explain it to outsiders. And you, stepping in now, become an outsider by default. That's part of why it feels like a secret. You weren't originally meant to be here just to look. You were meant to belong to the system that knew what looking was for. Your eyes keep adjusting, the reliefs become clearer. You start to see that the stone isn't simply decorated, it's structured. It's organized like thought. Borders frame scenes. Scenes connect to text. Text and image weave together until it's hard to tell which is supporting which. Egyptian temple walls are not like modern walls that exist to hold up a roof and display paint. These walls speak. They carry instructions, theology, celebration, and something like a permanent record of ritual conversation. In this chamber, the conversation is quieter, but not absent. The quiet doesn't mean emptiness. It means concentration. You let your gaze travel along a line of figures, and you feel, oddly, that the room is teaching you how to look. Look here, not there. Slow down. Don't grab. Don't assume. Let the meaning come to you at the speed it wants. So, you do. You notice a chisel mark catching light like a tiny star that only exists at this angle. You notice the way a carved curve implies motion without actually moving. You notice how deeply some parts are cut and how shallow others are, as if the carver used depth like emphasis pressing harder where it mattered, easing where it didn't. The wall becomes not just an image, but a record of labor. Someone standing here, once with a tool, making thousands of decisions that would become this quiet surface. There's comfort in that too. Labor is tangible. It's grounding. It keeps you from floating off into pure speculation. This is stone. This is carving. This is a hand that worked. And still, your mind begins to do what it always does when it enters a tight, ancient space. It starts listening for the famous thing. The thing people whisper about. The thing that brings visitors who otherwise might not care about temple reliefs at all. The thing that, in the modern world, tends to get described with a certain excited tone, one that doesn't quite belong in a chamber where sound turns to cloth. You can feel it before you see it, not because of supernatural energy, not because the stone glows, but because humans behave in predictable ways. When there is a talked about image in a place like this, the air around it changes simply because attention changes. People lean in, people lower their voices, people point carefully as if pointing too loudly would be disrespectful. Even if no one is here right now, you can sense the residue of that behavior like a path worn into the ground by repeated steps. And as you move, you become part of that behavior. Your body begins to anticipate the moment of noticing. Your eyes start scanning more deliberately, not rushing, but searching in that slow, sleepy way that still has direction. You pass panels that are beautiful in a steady, almost patient way. You see symbols that you don't fully translate, but can recognize as meaningful, like seeing musical notes, even if you can't play the piece. You see the confidence of a tradition that knows its own language. You see repetition that isn't laziness, but reinforcement, like a lullaby repeating its lines until the listener stops resisting. In the dimness, the reliefs feel like a kind of stone text message from the past, except without the panic of needing an immediate reply. The past is not waiting for you to answer. The past is simply present, carved, and steady. You keep walking, and your eyes keep learning. A small modern thought tries to intrude something about how odd it is that a temple wall can start arguments in the present day, but you let it drift away. This chamber is not the place for arguments. Arguments are loud. This chamber is slow. This chamber is cool. This chamber is the opposite of a comment section. You let the stone do what it does best, hold attention without giving closure. The walls are close enough that you can almost feel their temperature without touching them. If you did touch them, the stone would be cool and dry, and the sensation would travel into your fingertips like a reminder. You are here. The world is solid. Time has weight. It's the kind of reminder that makes you sleepy in the best way, because it pulls you out of mental spinning and into physical presence. You notice your breathing, how it sounds in your own ears more than in the room. You notice the small pause between inhale and exhale. The chamber doesn't care what time it is. The chamber doesn't care where you came from. The chamber simply holds you. And then, in a place along the wall where the carvings feel slightly more insistent, where the composition seems to gather itself, you find yourself stopping without deciding to stop. Your attention settles. Your eyes fix on a specific area, not because it is brighter, but because it feels arranged to catch a gaze that has finally slowed down enough to be caught. This is the moment the chamber becomes, in the softest sense, a secret. Not because it hides something forbidden, but because it offers something particular, an image that does not announce itself as strange, yet somehow becomes the one that makes people lean in. You can feel your own posture change. Your head tilts slightly. Your shoulders soften. Your voice, if you were going to speak, would drop to a whisper, not out of fear, but out of instinctive respect for close stone and close meaning. The relief in front of you is just stone, and yet it has the quiet pull of a question that doesn't need to be answered tonight. It has the calm gravity of something that can be stared at for a long time without being exhausted. It's carved plainly, patiently, as if it expects to be seen by lamplight, by trained eyes, by people who already know how to read the language of temples. And you standing there now, let your eyes settle into the lines and the shapes at their own pace, feeling the room's hush gather around your attention as the scene begins to come into focus. When you finally find it, when your eyes have adjusted enough that the wall stops being a general polite darkness and becomes a specific set of carved decisions, you understand why people keep returning to this one panel, the way a tongue keeps returning to a tooth that feels slightly different. It isn't that the stone is screaming for attention. It's that the stone has been shaped in a way that offers your mind a familiar outline, and the mind, tired, curious, always hungry for patterns, accepts the offer before it can ask itself whether it should. The shape sits there in the relief with a kind of calm confidence. It is long and oval, held as if it matters. Not held in the sense of hands cradling a delicate object, but held in the visual sense, framed, contained, presented. It has the smooth, enclosing curve of something designed to separate inside from outside. The line that marks its edge is steady, and your torchlight traces it like a finger following the rim of a bowl. Inside that oval is a serpent, carved as a living line of energy, a body that is both creature and concept. It curves with intention, not random writhing. The serpent feels alert, even in stone, as if it could choose to move at any moment, and simply hasn't bothered. It is the kind of stillness that feels active rather than asleep, like a cat lying in a patch of shade with one ear listening. There is a strange comfort in seeing a serpent rendered so matter-of-factly. In modern imagination, serpents are often treated as warnings or threats, but here the serpent is included. It belongs. It is not an intruder in the image. It is the point of the image. Its presence is central, and everyone around it behaves as if this is normal, as if the correct response to a divine serpent inside an enclosing shape is not panic but practiced seriousness. You can tell, even without decoding everything, that this scene is meant to be read with respect. The figures nearby aren't carved with wild gestures or frantic faces. Their bodies are composed. Their attention is directed. Their stance says, "We have done this before, and we will do it again, and there is no need to hurry." Below the oval, a pillar-like support rises. In the relief, it stands beneath the enclosure with the patient, vertical dignity of something that has one job and intends to do it forever. The support doesn't look like a casual prop. It looks like an essential piece of the image's grammar, the way a pedestal belongs under a statue, or the way a spine belongs inside a body. Even if you don't know the name of that pillar shape, you can feel that it is not decorative in the lazy sense. It is symbolic in the serious sense there because it holds meaning, and because meaning in the space likes to be held up. And then there are the attendance figures near the scene who seem to be assisting, witnessing, maintaining the moment. Their presence makes the panel feel less like an abstract diagram and more like a ritual situation. They give you scale. They give you context. They give you that quiet human detail that says, yes, someone is doing something here, even if the something is more theological than mechanical. The more you stare, the more the relief invites you into its particular kind of ambiguity. It offers you enough clarity to feel confident oval shape, serpent inside, support beneath, attendance nearby, and yet it withholds enough clarity that your mind starts supplying what it expects. It's like looking at a cloud that is just cloud enough to remain cloud, but just dog-shaped enough that you can't unsee the dog once you've seen it. This is where the modern nickname arrives, almost by itself. The shape can look uncomfortably familiar. It can look like something from another century visiting the past, a silhouette that resembles a device you might find in a store, wrapped in packaging, given an instruction manual, and then immediately thrown away because nobody reads instruction manuals anymore. The outline feels, to modern eyes, like a bulb and enclosed glow shape, elongated, smooth, as if it were meant to contain light. And once that word enters your mind, once the word bulb settles on the image like a little label, you notice how hard it is to peel it back off. It's not because the relief is secretly modern. It's because the mind loves to map the unknown onto the known, especially when it's tired, especially when it's late, especially when you're standing in a chamber where darkness makes every contour more dramatic, every line more important, every enclosed space feel like a hint. The brain is a pattern hunter, and it is also quietly a comfort seeker. Familiarity is comfort. Familiarity is a warm blanket thrown over ambiguity. So you stand there, looking at an ancient relief, and you feel your own mind do what minds do. Turn the scene into something it can hold without effort. The oval becomes a glass envelope. The serpent becomes a filament. The support becomes a socket. The attendants become technicians. You can feel those translations trying to happen inside you like a reflex. But you don't have to accept them tonight. Tonight you can keep the image in its own atmosphere, the way you kept the chamber itself slow, cool, patient. You can look at the bulb shape without letting it become a literal object. You can notice that the enclosure is carved like a sacred boundary, not like an engineering diagram. You can notice that the serpent's body looks alive in a symbolic way, not a practical way. You can notice that the human figures around it are not fussing with wires, not leaning in with tools, but attending with the seriousness of ritual, the seriousness of we are present for something that has meaning. Even the way the oval is held in the scene matters. It doesn't feel like an accidental shape someone happened to carve because they liked ovals. It feels deliberate, like a container, a vessel, a boundary, a place where something potent is kept contained, not because it is dangerous, but because containment itself is a sacred act. There is something very Egyptian about that, the idea that sacred forces are housed, protected, framed, carried. The temple is a container. The inner chamber is a container inside a container. Even your own body, in the simplest sense, is a container for breath. Egyptian ritual imagination loves containment because containment creates focus. It tells the mind where to look. It tells the mind what matters. So the oval becomes the focus, and the serpent inside becomes the living emphasis. The serpent is carved with a certain confidence, a continuous line that doesn't break. In the dim torchlight, that line can feel like movement even when it isn't. Your eyes slide along it and your mind follows. The way a lullaby leads a listener without demanding anything. The serpent's curve makes you slow down, makes your attention move in a loop rather than a straight line. Loops are soothing. Loops are how you fall asleep. And maybe that is part of why the bulb debate never stops. The image is loop-shaped in more than one way. It loops your attention. It loops your interpretation. It loops people back into the same argument again and again because the panel is a perfect machine for producing questions without producing closure. But again, you don't have to live in the argument right now. You can live in the shape. Look at the enclosure again. The oval is long, generous, almost womb-like in its form, an enclosed space that suggests holding, gestation, protected emergence. In a religious language, an enclosure often means a sacred space where something is being formed, born, revealed. A temple itself is that kind of enclosure. The world outside is bright and chaotic. The inner chamber is dark and controlled. And inside it something is kept, an image, a presence, a concentrated idea. So it would make sense for the relief to depict a serpent inside a sacred enclosure. A serpent can be power. A serpent can be divine force. A serpent can be the living line of energy in a world that is otherwise stone and silence. A serpent can be something that needs to be held, not because it is evil, but because it is potent. And the support beneath it, this pillar-like thing, stands like an axis. It implies that what is happening here is not floating, not casual. It is supported. It is upheld. It has structure. The structure in a ritual image is often as meaningful as the central figure. Because ritual is about structure, you do the same thing the same way so that meaning can settle rather than scatter. The attendants reinforce that. Their presence makes the panel feel procedural in the calmest way. You can imagine them as the human part of a cosmic process, witnesses, maintainers, participants in a scene that has been carved to be repeated in the mind. Their faces, if you can make them out in the half-light, are not excited. They are focused. The focus is almost boring, which is exactly what makes it believable. Sacred work is often boring in the way that any careful work is boring. Steady, repetitive, unhurried. There's a mild humor in that too. Modern visitors sometimes arrive expecting the temple to behave like a puzzle box, one clever trick away from revealing its secret. But the relief itself feels like it belongs to a world where meaning is slow and layered and not interested in impressing strangers. If the panel could speak, it might say something like, "You may call it whatever you want, but I will remain stone." And stone in a temple carries authority. It doesn't argue back, it simply stays. That's why people point at it. That's why people insist. That's why theories thrive here. The wall is not going to scroll away. It is not going to update itself. It will not correct you. It will not add a footnote. It just sits there holding the shape, the oval, the serpent, the support, the attendants. Your torchlight moves, and the scene changes slightly with the angle. Some lines disappear into shadow. Some lines brighten. This is another subtle trick the temple plays on modern eyes. It reminds you that seeing is not neutral. Seeing is conditional. The same relief can look different depending on where you stand, how high you hold the flame, how tired your eyes are, how eager your mind is to find something familiar. If you lean in just a little, you notice the carving's texture. The chisel marks are not random. They follow forms. They create subtle shading. The stone is worked so that light will behave a certain way on it. In the dim, the relief gains depth, and depth makes everything feel more real. Depth is persuasive. Depth makes the mind trust what it sees. And yet the relief is still symbolic. It is still arranged. The serpent is not simply a snake someone saw in a garden and decided to immortalize. It is a serpent placed inside an enclosure, attended by figures, supported by a pillar. This is not natural observation, it is intentional language. The temptation of modern eyes is to treat intentional language as a diagram. We see a clean arrangement and we assume it is technical. But ritual language is also clean. Religious art can be precise without being literal. It can be exact without being engineered. It can be arranged without being mechanical. That's what makes this panel so endlessly magnetic. It sits right on the border between the familiar and the foreign. Familiar shape, foreign purpose. Familiar silhouette, unfamiliar grammar. And the border is where imagination works hardest, especially late at night. So, late at night, you stand in the chamber and you let your mind wander gently, but not into arguments, not into certainty, just into slow noticing. You let the image feel strange without demanding it be solved. You let the oval be an oval. You let the serpent be a serpent. You let the support be a support. You let the attendants attend. You allow the stone to remain itself. You might notice something else too. The way the panel makes you lean in physically. It pulls you closer. It invites proximity. The chamber itself encourages quiet. The panel encourages closeness. Not because it is tiny, but because it is detailed in a way that feels like it will reward attention. And attention is a kind of ritual. When you pay attention slowly, you become part of the temple's intended behavior. You stop being a tourist rushing from highlight to highlight. You become briefly a person doing the most ancient temple action of all, looking with patience. There is a softness to that action. It lowers the heart rate. It slows the breath. It makes you less likely to carry your modern urgency into the room. Your thoughts become fewer, or at least less sharp. You stop trying to win the image. You stop trying to conquer it with an explanation. You let it remain a shape that holds meaning without giving closure. That is, in a strange way, the most sleep-friendly thing an ancient wall can do. Because a wall that gives closure wakes you up. A wall that gives a neat answer invites you to keep thinking, to keep building, to keep extending the idea. But a wall that holds attention without closure lets your mind rest inside uncertainty. It lets you say, quietly, I do not need to decide tonight. And in this chamber, that is a relief in more than one sense. So you stay with the bulb outline a little longer, letting it be what it is. A long oval form, held as if it matters, with a serpent inside like a living line of energy supported beneath, attended by figures with practiced seriousness. You notice how your brain keeps wanting to call it modern, and you notice how you can let that urge pass like a small ripple. You don't have to fight your own pattern hunting. You can just watch it, gently amused. Of course, the mind wants to see a device. The mind lives in a world of devices. It has been trained by decades of manufactured shapes. But this wall comes from a world where symbols were not just symbols. They were a way of speaking about power, creation, presence, and the strange dignity of forms that can hold meaning for centuries. And as you let the panel sit in your gaze steady, carved, unhurried, you can feel how easily this single shape could become the starting point for all the different things people think they re-seeing. There's a particular moment that happens in rooms like this: cool stone, low light, carved surfaces that refuse to behave like simple decoration when your mind gets tired of being patient and tries to reward itself with a shortcut. It's not a loud shortcut. It doesn't feel like laziness. It feels like a small, satisfying click. The way a puzzle piece feels satisfying even when you've pressed it into the wrong puzzle. The temptation begins quietly. You look at the long and close shape. You look at the serpent inside. You look at the support beneath, and you feel your brain reach for the nearest familiar object. A bulb, something glassy, something engineered, something you have seen 1,000 times in the modern world, sitting on a shelf, waiting to be twisted into place so a room can stop being dark. And once that modern object has been invited into the chamber, even as a faint idea, it behaves like a lens. It changes what everything else is allowed to be. The oval enclosure starts acting like it's made of glass instead of stone lines. The serpent starts acting like it's a filament instead of a sacred creature. The support starts acting like a socket instead of a ritual pillar. The attendants start acting like technicians, not because they are holding tools, but because your sentry has trained you to see people near a device and assume maintenance. The relief doesn't have to do anything extra to trigger this. It simply has to sit there, patient and ambiguous, and let your imagination do what it does best: turn a shape into a story. The ancient technology interpretation has a special kind of seductive simplicity. It doesn't ask you to learn a new symbolic language. It doesn't ask you to study temple conventions or religious context, or the slow logic of mythic imagery. It asks you to do something far easier and far more comforting: stay in your own world and bring your own world into the past. Because your world understands devices. Your world understands wires and power, and the idea that clever people might have discovered something and then lost it. Your world understands the romance of hidden inventions, the fantasy that history has a trapdoor, and that if you stare at the right panel long enough, the trapdoor will open, and a forgotten secret will rise up like a bubble from deep water. So the story forms itself almost automatically. The ancient temple becomes not just a temple, but a workshop disguised as a temple. The priest becomes not just a priest, but an engineer wearing spiritual clothing as camouflage. The relief becomes not just an image, but evidence carved plainly in stone, as if the past wanted to brag but couldn't help itself. And it's a very human kind of brag. Not the brag of poetry or ritual or devotion. The brag of, we had this first. It's worth noticing how gentle that brag feels in your body. It's like a warm little spark of certainty. The image is old. The room is old. The darkness is old. You, by comparison, are very temporary. Certainty is comforting in an ancient place, because ancient places can make you feel small in a way that is both beautiful and slightly unsettling. A quick explanation is a way to regain your footing. It's like finding a handrail in a dim corridor. So you imagine the glow shape as an enclosed lamp. You imagine the serpent as the glowing line inside it. You imagine the support as a base. You imagine the figures as attendants to a device rather than participants in a rite. The whole scene becomes a diagram, and diagrams are soothing because they pretend there is only one correct reading. And once you've made it a diagram, the relief becomes a kind of locked door. Not a door you open with keys, but a door you open with insistence. The more you look, the more you see. The more you see, the more you feel validated. The oval looks like a bulb because you keep calling it a bulb, and the brain is loyal to the stories it repeats. The brain, like a sleepy friend, does not enjoy being corrected after it has settled into a comfortable position. In this reading, every small detail becomes helpful. Curves become purposeful, lines become wires, the carved boundary becomes glass. The serpent becomes filament. The surrounding elements become supports. Even the fact that it S inside a temple becomes part of the romance. Of course it S in a temple, because temples are secretive and secrets prefer stone. And if you've ever watched how people talk when they believe they found a secret, you know the posture. They lean in, they lower their voices, they point carefully. They adopt the gentle urgency of someone sharing a forbidden recipe. They start speaking in confident fragments, the way people speak when they want certainty to sound natural. Look at the shape, look at the inside, look at the base, look how obvious it is. Obviousness is a powerful sensation. It feels like intelligence, it feels like clarity. But in rooms like this, obviousness is often just familiarity wearing a confident expression. Still, the temptation isn't stupid. It's not even irrational in the way people like to mock. It is a very normal response to a very specific trigger, a familiar silhouette placed in an unfamiliar context. Your mind tries to reconcile the mismatch. It would rather believe in a hidden device than accept the slower truth that symbolic art can resemble modern objects by accident, or by the sheer geometry of human design. Humans make ovals, humans enclose things, humans draw boundaries, humans carve containers. Humans love the visual idea of something held safely inside something else, because being held is comforting. A lamp is held inside glass. A serpent is held inside a sacred enclosure. The outline can echo across centuries without carrying the same meaning. But the ancient technology temptation doesn't like echoes, it likes direct lines. It likes conclusions you can hold in one hand, so it treats the relief like proof. That's the key word here, proof. Not interesting, not ambiguous, not strangely familiar, but proof. Proof that the past wasn't just past. Proof that the past had a device. Proof that modernity isn't unique. Proof that someone, somewhere, knew how to make light without soot, without oil, without smoke, without the ordinary messiness of flame. And the desire behind that proof is deeply understandable. Flame is fragile. Flame flickers, flame smokes. Flame needs fuel. A bulb, by comparison, is clean and consistent. It's the dream of controlled light. So the mind looks at the relief and wants the ancient world to have had the dream too and to have achieved it. There's also a quieter desire tucked inside, the desire to catch history in a mistake. If the relief is a lamp, then history has been misread. Institutions have been wrong. Experts have missed something. The big official story has a crack. And there is a particular, almost cozy thrill in imagining that you, the person in the dim chamber, the person watching a grainy image online at midnight, the person who's simply noticed, could be the one to point at the crack. It makes you feel awake in a sleepy world. It makes you feel like you've found a hidden room in a familiar house. So the relief becomes less about Egypt and more about the pleasure of discovery. The chamber becomes less about ritual and more about a mystery narrative. The wall becomes a stage for a certain kind of modern hope. Hope that there is always a bigger twist, a deeper secret, a smarter explanation that makes everything else look naive. And because this is bedtime storytelling, you don't have to judge that hope harshly. You can just watch it gently, like watching your own thoughts drift in and out as you fall asleep. The mind is always tempted by stories that make it feel special. It's not evil. It's simply human. It's the same part of you that loves a rumor, loves a hidden passage, loves the idea that the world is more interesting than it appears. The temple, of course, encourages this part of you, not intentionally in a modern marketing sense, but structurally. The darkness helps, restricted spaces help, the authority of stone helps. When a claim is attached to stone, it feels heavier. It feels less like someone's opinion and more like reality's own handwriting. A drawing on paper can be dismissed. A carving in stone feels permanent, and permanence is persuasive. So the temptation grows in the shadows. You start noticing how the chamber seems designed for this kind of thinking. The light is low, so your eyes can't take in everything at once. Your attention narrows. Narrow attention makes patterns feel stronger. The carvings are dense, so your brain can't translate them easily. Untranslated material invites dramatic translations. The room is quiet, so your own thoughts become louder. And loud thoughts like to sound certain. And then there's the mood of ancient. Ancient makes everything feel like it might contain surprises. Because ancient is already a kind of mystery. You are surrounded by surfaces made by people who are unreachable. You cannot ask them what they meant. You cannot check your interpretation with a quick conversation. So your mind fills the gap with the kind of explanation it already knows how to produce. If you grew up in a world where technology is the main magic, you will reach for technology as an explanation for magic-shaped things. It's that simple and that human. In the ancient technology temptation, the relief becomes an accidental mirror. You look at Egypt and see your own century reflected back. Your century loves devices. Your century loves power. Your century loves the idea that power can be hidden, stored, accessed, lost, rediscovered. Your century loves the drama of they knew, and they didn't want you to know, and this changes everything. The relief sits there and accepts these projections without complaint. Stone is very tolerant of being misinterpreted. Stone has time, and that's why the argument keeps starting, because the relief doesn't correct anyone. It doesn't say gently, no, that's not what I am. It just continues to be a long oval form with a serpent inside and a support beneath and figures attending. It continues to be the perfect shape for your brain to turn into a device if your brain wants a device badly enough. If you let yourself, you can even feel how the relief encourages a particular style of certainty. The certainty is built from pointing. Pointing is a powerful ritual in itself. When you point, you feel like you're doing something active, something decisive. Here, you say. This part, look. Pointing turns interpretation into performance, and performance makes belief feel real. So the temptation thrives on the small acts that follow, circling details in your mind, comparing outlines, repeating the same claims, collecting the same images, feeling that each repetition adds weight. It is like a lullaby in reverse. Instead of repeating a phrase to soothe yourself into sleep, you repeat a phrase to soothe yourself into certainty. But since we're keeping this slow and cozy, you can hold the temptation gently, like holding a warm object that doesn't need to be used. You can understand why people find the idea seductive without needing to decide anything tonight. You can let the relief be a shape that invites the ancient technology story, and you can let that story sit in the room like a visitor interesting, talkative, perhaps a little too confident, but not someone you have to argue with right now. Because the chamber is still cool. The limestone is still breathing its quiet air. The torchlight is still soft on carved lines. The relief is still steady, and the temptation, like all temptations, feels strongest when you lean in close and let certainty do the leaning for you. So you can let yourself lean in, notice the familiar silhouette, feel the spark of what if, and then without rushing allow your gaze to loosen slightly, as if preparing to step back and let the same stone speak in a calmer tone. After you let that ancient technology story sit in your mind for a while after you felt how neatly it slides into place, how it turns a dim chamber into a kind of discovery channel for the imagination. There is another way to look that doesn't require fight and doesn't require you to humiliate your own curiosity. It simply asks you to step back a half step, the way you step back from a painting when you've been too close to it, and you realize you've been staring at brushstrokes instead of the whole scene. In that half step, the relief changes its personality. It stops behaving like a diagram. It starts behaving like temple language. Temple language is a strange thing to modern eyes because it is precise without being literal. It is structured without being mechanical. It is crowded without being chaotic. It is the visual equivalent of a chant. Repeated forms, repeated roles, repeated symbols arranged to say something that I assent is supposed to be solved in one glance. It is meant to be revisited. It is meant to be carried in the mind. It is meant to sit in a ritual environment where meaning gathers slowly, like dust settling in still air. So the calm counter-reading begins with a softer assumption. What if the wall is speaking in symbols, not in machines? You look again at the long oval enclosure. Instead of seeing glass, you see containment, a sacred boundary, a vessel, a bubble of protected space. Temples, after all, are nothing but large containers for smaller containers. An outer wall holding courtyards, courtyards holding halls, halls holding darker chambers holding images, and images holding presence. The architecture itself is a statement that the divine is something you approach by layers and by narrowing and by quieting. So an enclosure inside a relief makes sense. If it's the temple's larger grammar, it says, here is something that must be held, framed, protected, kept in its proper place. Inside the enclosure is the serpent. The technology reading wants the serpent to be a filament because that keeps the whole story inside modern familiarity. But the calm reading lets the serpent remain what it most naturally is in an Egyptian temple context, a living symbol of power, divinity, movement, life force, protective potency, and the strange electricity of the sacred. And it is worth letting that word electricity pass through your mind without turning it into wires. Ancient people felt force too. They felt thunder. They felt the way hair rises in dry wind. They felt heat move, light move, fear move, prayer move. They didn't need circuits to speak about energy. They used creatures and breath and serpents and the idea of something alive traveling through space. A serpent is a perfect symbol for a force that moves invisibly until it appears. It is a line that can coil, extend, vanish, return. It can live in hidden places. It can emerge from darkness. It can be dangerous without being evil, protective without being tame. It can be power shaped like a creature. So the serpent inside the oval becomes, in the calm reading, a sacred force contained within a sacred boundary, not trapped, not imprisoned. Contained the way fire is contained in a hearth, not because fire is shameful, but because fire is useful and sacred when it stays where it belongs. Below the enclosure is the support, the pillar-like element that, in the technology story, becomes a socket. In the calm reading, it becomes exactly what it looks like in temple language, a supporting concept, a pedestal for a potent thing, an axis, a stand, a marker that says this is being presented properly. In Egyptian art, supports are rarely just supports. A throne is not just a chair. A pedestal is not just a base. These are symbolic objects, the way a crown is symbolic, the way a scepter is symbolic. Structure itself becomes meaning. And then there are the attendants. Their presence is one of the strongest arguments for the calm reading, not because they prove anything, but because they make the scene feel like a ritual moment rather than an engineering moment. They are not depicted with the casual posture of people fixing a household item. They are arranged in that composed, deliberate manner that Egyptian relief uses for sacred attendance. Bodies in profile, gestures controlled, attention focused, roles clearly assigned. They don't need to be doing something that modern eyes would call technical for the scene to be purposeful. Ritual is purposeful too. Ritual is, in fact, one of the most purposeful things humans do, repeating actions, not because repetition is efficient, but because repetition is how meaning is stabilized. In the calm counter reading, the relief is not saying, here is a device. It is saying something like, here is power, contained, attended, contextualized. This is where the debate becomes interesting in a quiet way. Both readings, technology, and ritual are trying to explain the same experience. The shape looks modern. The calm reading doesn't deny that. It simply reframes it. It says, the shape looks modern because your brain has a modern library of silhouettes. Your brain recognizes the outline of a bulb because you have seen bulbs. But the wall was not carved for your library. It was carved for another library one in which an enclosure might mean a womb, a vessel, a sacred bubble of protection, an egg, a domain, a place where something potent is held during transformation. You don't need to choose one symbol to make that work. Egyptian imagery often allows a symbol to be more than one thing at once. That's part of its power. It is not built for a single, crisp translation. It is built for layered meaning, the way a poem can carry multiple resonances without collapsing. So the oval can be a container, it can be a boundary, it can be a sacred space, it can be a protective shell. It can even, in the broadest sense, be a kind of light symbol, not because it is an actual lamp, but because enclosed potency is often associated with emergence, something inside waiting to become visible, a seed inside a husk, a child inside a womb. a sun inside a horizon that hasn't opened yet. The temple is full of these metaphors, and the calm reading lets the relief belong to that metaphorical world. If you stay with this reading, another quiet fact becomes comforting. Temples are full of images that are meant for trained readers. Not every wall is for casual visitors. Some scenes are meant to be read by priests who know the ritual language, the mythic references, the theological shorthand. That can make imagery feel coded to modern eyes, and modern eyes often interpret coded as technical. But coded can also mean religious. It can mean specialist. It can mean you're not supposed to understand instantly because instant understanding is not the point. The calm counter reading doesn't mock the desire for instant clarity. It simply invites you to accept that the wall is not designed for instant clarity. In fact, one of the most soothing things you can do in a chamber like this is to give up the need for instant clarity. It is like giving up the need to know the ending of a dream while you are still dreaming. You let it unfold. You let it remain strange. You let the symbols do their slow work. So you stand there and you notice how the relief behaves when you stop treating it like evidence and start treating it like language. The carving becomes less about proving anything and more about shaping attention. The attendants become less like technicians and more like participants in a scene of mythic maintenance, humans or divine figures attending to the contained force, ensuring it remains in its proper context. And context is everything in temple art. Context is what prevents power from becoming chaos. The temple exists to make power usable, to take cosmic forces and place them in a structure humans can approach. The relief mirrors that project. It shows a powerful thing, serpent energy within an enclosure, within a scene, within a ritual frame. Its containment all the way down, like nested dolls made of meaning. This reading also explains why the argument doesn't end. Because if you treat the relief as ritual language, you accept that two people can point to the same stone and feel validated for opposite reasons. The technology viewer points at the outline and says, it looks like a bulb. Therefore, bulb. The calm viewer points at the same outline and says, it is an enclosure with a serpent inside, attended in a sacred context. Therefore, symbol. Both are using the same visual data. Both are using different mental libraries. And the stone is patient enough to host both. The calm counter reading is, in a way, more psychologically honest about what's happening in the room. It admits that perception is not neutral. It admits that your century carries its own assumptions into ancient spaces. It admits that the temple's darkness and density make interpretation feel dramatic. It admits that the relief is designed to hold attention without giving closure. It also admits something else, that uncertainty can be useful. This is not a satisfying idea for people who want arguments to end, but for bedtime storytelling, it is perfect. The relief doesn't have to be solved to be meaningful. It can be meaningful precisely because it stays on the border. The border keeps the mind gently engaged without forcing it into stress. It keeps you curious without making you frantic. It keeps you awake just enough to listen and sleepy enough to stop needing victory. So the calm counter reading does not slam the door on the bulb thought. It simply softens it. It turns it into one possible association rather than a final verdict. It says, yes, it can look like a bulb. That is interesting. That tells us something about how modern minds see. And now, let's also consider what it might mean within the temple's own symbolic grammar. Within that grammar, serpents are not random. Enclosures are not random. Attendants are not random. Supports are not random. These are recurring elements in a religious system that uses images to talk about creation, authority, protection, and the management of cosmic forces. And you can feel how different that is from the technology story. The technology story turns the relief into a locked door that might open if you stir hard enough. The calm story turns the relief into a door that is already open, but opens into a symbolic landscape rather than a workshop. It invites you not to discover a device, but to enter a way of thinking in which power is spoken of through creatures and containers and ritual seriousness. There's something quietly amusing about how the two readings mirror two different kinds of modern desire. The technology reading wants the past to be secretly modern. The calm reading lets the past remain past strange, poetic, symbolic, and asks the modern viewer to become slightly less modern for a moment, not permanently, just enough to listen. So you stand there and you let your attention rest on the serpent inside the enclosure. You imagine it as a divine force, alive and potent, held in a sacred boundary. You imagine the attendants as keepers of the moment, not technicians of a device. You imagine the support as a symbolic stand, a structured base for something structured. You let the relief become what temple reliefs often are, visual theology, and then you notice how your body responds. The technology story tends to sharpen the mind. It makes you want to argue, prove, persuade, win. The calm story tends to soften the mind. It makes you want to observe, accept, sit with ambiguity. The chamber itself seems to prefer the second response. The chamber's acoustics encourage quiet. The cool limestone encourage patience. The torchlight encourage slow looking. So the calm counter reading fits the room like a blanket fits a tired person. Not dramatic, not decisive, but deeply appropriate. The argument still exists outside, of course. People still point, people still insist. People still carry their preferred reading into the stone and feel the stone agreeing with them. But in the chamber, in the low light, with your breath steady and your eyes slow, you can let the relief be what it most reliably is. A scene arranged to hold meaning, not to end debate. And as you keep looking softly, without urgency, you can feel how easily the same wall can support multiple interpretations, not because one is secretly correct and the other is foolish, but because the wall is doing what sacred art often does best, offering a shape that keeps the mind circling, gently without forcing it to land. It happens so quietly, you almost miss the moment it starts. Your eyes land on a shape, and your mind, without asking permission, begins to translate it. Not from one ancient language to another, but from unknown into useful. Your century has trained you to do this the way a body has trained itself to breathe. You don't wake up and decide to look for patterns. You simply open your eyes, and the patterns walk toward you like they own the place. In the dim chamber, with torchlight soft on limestone, the relief isn't just carved stone anymore. It becomes a test. A little private test your brain runs on itself. How fast can I make this familiar? How quickly can I turn this into something I recognize? Something I can hold in one hand? Something I could explain to a friend without sounding unsure? You can feel the mind doing it, because the mind does it with a certain kind of comfort. Familiarity is soothing. It's a warm drink in a cold room. It's a handrail on a staircase you can't quite see. The ancient world is enormous and distant, and your brain doesn't like distance. Your brain likes closeness. Your brain likes objects with names. So the long oval enclosure begins to behave like an object, not a symbol. The serpent inside begins to behave like a component, not a creature. The support beneath begins to behave like a base, not a ritual stand. And the attendants begin to behave like people working on something, because your modern eyes have been raised on images where people standing near a device are always doing something device-related. This isn't stupidity, it's efficiency. The mind is an efficiency machine. It is constantly trying to reduce the unknown into something manageable. It has a library of silhouettes, and it loves matching new shapes to old templates. Ovals, domes, capsules, bulbs, your world is full of them. You've seen them in streetlights and kitchen lamps and medical diagrams and product packaging. You have seen them so often that your brain has a shortcut key for them. And once the shortcut key is pressed, the relief changes its behavior. Not because the relief has moved, but because your attention has redrawn it. Your mind takes the carved outline and thickens it into certainty. It takes the serpent's curve and straightens it into function. It takes the whole scene and starts arranging it like a diagram, because diagrams are how modern people feel safe. A diagram is comforting because it implies a single answer. A diagram implies someone intended it to be decoded. A diagram makes you feel like the universe is polite enough to give you instructions. And in a temple chamber where everything is older than your great-grandparents, 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 politeness is a very attractive fantasy. So your mind starts doing what it always does when faced with ambiguity. It narrates. The narration is soft at first, just a small thought. It looks like a bulb. Then the thought repeats, and it gains weight. It really looks like a bulb. Then the thought recruits supporting details, because the brain loves a team. The serpent looks like a filament. The support looks like a socket. The figures look like attendants. The enclosure looks like glass. The whole relief begins to behave like evidence, not art. And once you've named it, you can't unname it easily. That is one of the strangest powers of modern perception. The first confident label tends to become a permanent resident. It rearranges everything around it. Your mind starts seeing the relief through the label instead of seeing the label as one possible interpretation. The label becomes a lens, and the lens becomes your eyes. It is a little like the way you can't stop noticing a word once you've learned it, or the way a ringtone can make you think your phone is vibrating even when it ISM. The brain is not always interested in being correct. It's interested in being consistent. Consistency feels like stability. Stability feels like rest. So bulb becomes stable. And now, in that stability, the relief becomes strangely modern, not because it is, but because your attention has modernized it. Your attention is doing a quiet kind of time travel. It is pulling the ancient image forward into your world, where it can sit politely on a table with other recognizable objects. It is turning a sacred scene into a household silhouette, because household silhouettes are safe. There is a gentle irony here, and is the kind of irony you can smile at without fully waking up. The relief is famous partly because it makes modern viewers feel clever, and the mechanism that produces that cleverness is often just pattern matching. The brain sees what it is trained to see, and then congratulates itself for seeing it. The temple doesn't need to trick anyone. The mind is already trickable in the nicest way. It is like a friendly dog that hears the word walk and immediately invents a whole future. The mind hears the word bulb and immediately invents a whole machine. It's also worth noticing how the chamber itself helps the mind do this. Darkness is a powerful collaborator. In bright daylight, you see too much. The details compete. Your attention gets messy, but in low light, the mind simplifies the world. It reduces the scene to the boldest outlines and most dramatic contrasts. Low light makes silhouettes stronger, and strong silhouettes feel like proof. That's why the bulb outline is so persuasive in torchlight. The edges glow, the background falls away. Your eye catches the enclosure and holds it, and the mind fills the interior with whatever interior a modern enclosure usually has. A modern enclosure usually has a function. A modern enclosure usually has a reason you can explain in one sentence, so the mind offers you one sentence. Ancient technology, the sentence feels satisfying because it's short. Short explanations are like little sleep pills for uncertainty. They lower the mental effort. They reduce the pressure of not knowing. They make you feel like you can stop searching. And yet, ironically, they often make you search more, because once you believe you've found a device, you start looking for more device details to support it. You start hunting for wires, sockets, switches, anything that will confirm your first sentence. You become a curator of your own certainty. This is where modern eyes become especially powerful and also especially dangerous to nuance. Modern eyes are trained by modern media. We live surrounded by images designed to be understood quickly. Logos, icons, interfaces, diagrams, simplified pictures that turn complexity into clean shapes. Your brain has been practicing this for years, maybe decades, without calling it practice. Every app icon, every instruction diagram, every simplified graphic has trained your attention to treat a shape as a function. A circle with a line, power button, a triangle, play, a magnifying glass, search, a light bulb, idea, and in a very tired way, the mind treats the Dendera relief like an interface. It wants it to be clickable. It wants it to open a hidden menu. It wants the ancient world to behave like a modern screen. Press here and the secret appears. But stone is not a screen. Stone is slow. Stone is patient. Stone does not respond to tapping, so your mind compensates. It becomes the response. It taps the image with interpretation. It presses harder. It adds more certainty. It builds a narrative that feels like an opening door. It turns the relief into a locked room mystery, and it turns you into the detective, because being a detective is more comfortable than being confused. You can feel how seductive that role is. Confusion is passive, detective work is active. Confusion makes you small, detective work makes you powerful. In a huge ancient space, power is appealing. So modern eyes reach for power the way hands reach for warmth. And there is another modern habit at work here, the habit of seeing technology as the most respectable form of magic. In older worlds, the sacred was magic. In modern worlds, technology is magic. You don't need to understand how electricity works to use it. You just flip a switch and light appears. That is not so different in emotional terms from a ritual where someone speaks words and a result appears. Both are systems that feel mysterious from the inside. So when modern eyes see a mysterious ancient symbol, they often translate it into technology because that translation keeps the mystery inside a familiar modern frame. It says, this is not superstition. This is engineering. And engineering in modern culture feels like the most honorable explanation. It feels like the explanation that earns respect. It's a quiet status story, even in a dark chamber. The mind thinks it is simply being clever, but part of the cleverness is social. If you call the relief a symbol, you might sound poetic. If you call it a bulb, you might sound bold. Boldness is rewarded. Boldness is shareable. Boldness is the kind of certainty people repeat. So the bulb theory becomes a social object as well as a perceptual one. People pass it around. People point to it. People build videos, arguments, counter-arguments. The relief becomes less about what it is and more about what it lets modern people do, perform certainty in an uncertain world. All of that begins with modern eyes, with pattern hunting. The brain is, at its core, a pattern hunter. It has to be. It evolved to notice movement in tall grass, to spot faces, to read intent and posture, to predict danger before danger arrives. Pattern hunting is the mind's oldest job. But in a temple, that job doesn't disappear. It simply finds new material. It hunts patterns in stone instead of grass. So you look at the relief and your mind starts stacking details into a story your century understands best. Curves become outlines. Outlines become objects. Objects become functions. Functions become explanations. Explanations become convictions. And the strange part is how quickly it happens. 1 minute you are simply seeing, and the next minute you are interpreting so confidently that you forget you ever chose the interpretation. That forgetting is important because it explains why arguments around this relief feel so intense. People aren't just disagreeing about a carving. They're disagreeing about the reliability of their own perception. When someone challenges your interpretation, it can feel like they're challenging your eyes, your intelligence, your competence. And nobody likes being told their eyes are biased. Nobody likes being told their brain is doing brain things. But the calm truth is that everyone's brain is doing brain things. We all see through our Eris habits. We all carry templates. We all have a library of familiar objects waiting to be projected onto unfamiliar shapes. Your modern eyes are not neutral. They are trained. And training isn't always wrong. Training is useful. It helps you navigate your world. It helps you cross streets, read signs, interpret expressions, recognize danger. But it also means you have favorite explanations. It also means you have default metaphors. It also means you have a kind of visual accent, an accent that can make an ancient symbol sound like a modern machine. In the Dendera chamber, the accent is loud because the environment amplifies it. Darkness sharpens silhouettes. Mystery sharpens imagination. The authority of stone sharpens conviction. The fact that you cannot ask the ancient artists what they meant sharpens your desire to decide. So modern eyes decide. They decide quickly. They decide confidently. And once they decide, they keep noticing new evidence that supports the decision, because the mind is a loyal friend to its own first impressions. This is why the relief becomes so sticky as a debate. It offers the modern eye just enough to latch onto a capsule-like outline, an inner serpent line, a base-like support, and then it allows modern perception to do the rest. The relief doesn't need to contain a literal bulb. It only needs to resemble one from a certain angle, under a certain light, inside a mind trained by certain objects. And your mind, being helpful, supplies the rest. It supplies the glow. It supplies the glass. It supplies the socket. It supplies the story of a device hidden in stone. It's almost tender in a way. The mind wants to help you feel at home in the ancient world. It wants to make the old familiar. It wants to build a bridge. The only problem is that the bridge often leads back to modernity instead of deeper into ancient meaning. You cross it and you find yourself standing not in Egypt, but in your own century, holding a confident narrative like a flashlight, which is why this section matters, because seeing with modern eyes is the beginning of the entire argument. The argument starts not on the wall, but in the mind. It starts the moment your perception decides the relief should behave like a machine. It starts when you choose a lens and then forget you chose it. So tonight, you can simply notice the lens. You can notice how quickly your mind makes the oval into an object. You can notice how quickly it turns the serpent into a filament. You can notice how it recruits every surrounding detail into the machine story. You can notice the quiet pleasure that certainty gives you. And you can notice the quiet restlessness it produces as well. The way certainty makes you want to hunt for more confirmation. The way it keeps your mind working when the chamber itself is asking you to be still. You don't have to stop being modern. You just have to become aware of the modernness of your seeing. You can let the relief remain carved and quiet, and you can let your mind remain clever and eager. And you can watch how the two meet, how your modern eyes redraw an ancient image into something your century can recognize. And how that redrawing becomes the first spark that keeps the entire mystery breathing. And as you keep watching your own perception at work, you may begin to wonder softly, without urgency, why certain spaces, certain walls, certain chambers make this kind of seeing feel almost inevitable. It isn't only the image that starts arguments, it's the place the image lives in. A temple is not a neutral room with good lighting and a helpful caption underneath, the way a museum tries to be. A temple is a machine for mood. It is architecture designed to change your breathing, to narrow your attention, to make you feel that whatever you're looking at matters more than you do. So you step into the space and the space begins to speak first. The corridor doesn't announce itself as a corridor. It feels like a throat, like the inside of a held breath. The walls come close enough that your shoulders remember they have edges. The air is cooler than you expect, not because someone installed air conditioning for your comfort, but because limestone holds the day's heat differently, and because the deeper rooms keep their own climate, like a sealed jar. Even before you see any relief clearly, your body has already accepted a story. This is secret. And once your body accepts secret, your mind starts behaving like a person who has been told there's a secret. It leans forward. It listens harder. It begins to suspect that every detail is a clue, not just a detail evidence. Evidence that someone meant to hide something from you, specifically you, as if the ancient world knew your exact curiosity and prepared a puzzle for it. Temples invite that feeling because temples were designed to be restricted. Some rooms were not meant for everyone. Some images were not meant for casual eyes. The layout itself teaches you that access is a privilege. You walk through layers, you pass thresholds, you move from brighter space to darker space, from open air to enclosed air. Each step says you are entering deeper meaning. And meaning, when it's treated as deeper, starts to sound like coded. Modern minds love the word coded, because coded implies a correct translation, a hidden message, a lock that can be opened if you're clever enough. Coded makes you feel less helpless in the face of strangeness. If something is coded, it is at least solvable. It is not just different. It is different in a way that secretly wants you to catch up. So the temple's restriction becomes fuel. The darkness becomes fuel. The quiet becomes fuel. The sense of being inside a place that belonged to trained specialists becomes fuel. You start to imagine that if priests needed training, then the walls must be saying something more than they appear to say. And you're not wrong about that, at least in spirit. Temple imagery really is layered. It really is dense. It really does operate in a visual language that includes myth, ritual, theology, politics, tradition, and the strange, practical business of making the cosmos feel stable. It is not designed for a quick glance. It is designed for repetition, for returning and returning again, and letting the same forms settle deeper. But a modern visitor, trained by a world of fast comprehension, experiences that density as friction. The image resists instant understanding. The brain does not enjoy resistance, so it tries to remove it. And one of the fastest ways to remove resistance is to transform the image into something modern. This is how temples invite theories. They create the perfect conditions for modern pattern hunger to become certainty. Take the lighting. Torchlight and low illumination do something peculiar. They simplify. They blur fine distinctions and strengthen bold shapes. They make outlines more important than interior details. You can't see everything, so your mind becomes the thing that completes the picture. The mind fills in gaps the way water fills low places. And the mind does not fill gaps randomly. It fills them with what it already knows. So a long oval form becomes a familiar long oval form from your own world. A serpent line becomes a line that behaves the way lines behave in modern diagrams. A support becomes a support that behaves like a support in modern objects. The temple's lighting encourages your brain to do this because the temple docenti provide the kind of neutral, even illumination that modern object reading prefers. It gives you drama instead, and drama makes you interpret. The temple also gives you authority. Stone has authority. Stone feels permanent. Stone feels like it cannot be accidental. When something is carved into stone, when it took labor, tools, planning, time, you assume intention. You assume nobody spent that effort to carve something casual. Even if the carved thing is symbolic, you still feel it as deliberate. So the mind treats the relief not like a sketch, but like a declaration. It thinks if it's here, it must mean something specific. And then it takes the next modern step. If it means something specific, it must mean something that can be stated clearly. This is where the machine reading becomes so tempting. Machines are clear. Machines have parts. Machines have purposes. Machines do not usually tolerate ambiguity. They either work or they don't. A machine explanation makes a relief feel crisp. It turns a dense symbolic scene into a tidy story. And tidy stories are extremely attractive in places that feel ancient and overwhelming. Another reason temples invite these theories is that temples are already mysterious to many modern visitors. Not because the ancients were trying to prank the future, but because translation is hard, context is missing, and the entire worldview behind the art is not automatically inside your head. If you don't live inside the symbolic system, the system feels like a code. And if something feels like a code, people begin to act like code breakers. They search for one-on-one correspondences. This shape equals that object. This line equals that component. This posture equals that function. It is not that one-on-one reading is always wrong. Symbolic systems do have conventions, but modern code breaking often carries a modern expectation. A code should decode into plain, literal facts. Temple imagery often refuses that. It decodes into relationships, roles, sacred associations, layered metaphors, ritual sequences. It decodes into a way of thinking, not a single answer. So when people want a single answer, they look elsewhere. They drag the image into a world where single answers are normal. And that world, for modern people, is the world of technology. Technology is the modern sacred in disguise. You can hear it in how we talk. Devices are powerful, systems are smart, networks are invisible. Energy flows, tools change reality. In older worlds, temples held the mysteries of power. In modern worlds, technology holds them. So when you walk into a temple and encounter an image that feels powerful and mysterious, your mind naturally tries to translate it into the language of the modern sacred. This doesn't mean the theory is correct. It means the translation is psychologically comfortable. Temples also invite these theories because they are places of controlled access, and controlled access always implies that something valuable is being protected. Humans are extremely sensitive to the idea of hidden value. If a door is locked, we assume there's something behind it worth keeping. If a chamber is narrow and dark and hard to reach, we assume it contains something more important than the bright courtyard outside. So when you see a puzzling relief in a restricted feeling space, the mind does a very sleepy kind of math. Difficult access plus puzzling image equals secret knowledge. Secret knowledge is one of the most addictive ideas humans have ever invented. It makes you feel special. It makes you feel like you have a path to certainty that other people don't. And it makes you feel like the past is not just old, it is personal because it is speaking to you in a way others might miss. A temple can make you feel that without ever saying it aloud. The architecture does the suggestion for it. There is also the simple fact that temple art often looks technical to untrained eyes. It is precise. It is stylized. It uses repeated forms. It uses controlled posture. It uses consistent symbolic elements. The figures can look like they're performing procedures because ritual itself can look procedural. When someone holds an object in a certain way, stands in a certain way, repeats a gesture, faces a direction, attends to a central form, modern eyes can mistake that for work in the engineering sense, because modern life associates repeated procedure with technical tasks. But in temples, repeated procedure is often liturgy. It is ritual maintenance. It is the careful business of keeping the cosmos from fraying. So a modern viewer sees attendants and thinks technicians. A trained reader sees attendants and thinks ritual roles. And the reason temples invite arguments is that both readings can feel internally coherent, especially when the image is ambiguous enough to support multiple narratives. Ambiguity is the key ingredient here. Not ambiguity as a flaw, but ambiguity as a property of symbols when you don't share the cultural context. Symbols require a shared library. When you don't have the library, you supply your own. And modern libraries are full of machines. So you supply machines. You supply sockets and bulbs and filaments and devices because those are the objects your mind can summon quickly at midnight. In low light when you're tired and your brain wants to feel the relief click into place. Another ingredient is the way temples slow you down. This sounds like it would prevent wild theories, but it often does the opposite. In your normal life, you glance and move on. In a temple, you linger. The air, the quiet, the sense of being watched by centuries, these things make you stare longer than you would at a random wall. And staring is a powerful engine for interpretation. The longer you stare at an ambiguous form, the more your mind generates possibilities. At first it's gentle, then it becomes persuasive. Then it becomes a story that feels inevitable. This is why the bulb idea, once it appears, becomes so sticky. It doesn't just visit your mind and leave. It moves in. It rearranges the furniture. It becomes the default explanation you return to whenever you glance again. And because you re in a temple, because you re already in a place that feels meaningful, the explanation picks up extra gravity. It feels more true simply because it is happening inside a heavy environment. A temple makes even your own thoughts feel weightier. And there is one more quiet reason temples invite these theories: the modern urge to collapse distance. The past is far away and distance is uncomfortable. It makes you feel small. It makes you feel like you don't belong. It makes you feel like the people who built this world were not thinking about you at all, which is true and which is humbling. So modern minds often try to shrink the distance by finding themselves in the past. If the ancients had technology like ours, then they become more familiar. If they carved devices into stone, then they become almost like us. The past becomes less alien, less unreachable. It becomes a mirror instead of a foreign country. This is why ancient technology stories are emotionally soothing. They turn the past into a version of the present. They reduce the loneliness of historical difference. Temple spaces, with their alien conventions and their silent gods, intensify that loneliness. So the mind reaches harder for mirrors. Now, none of this requires anyone to be dishonest. People can be sincerely persuaded by what they see. The mind can sincerely experience the relief as evidence. The mind can sincerely feel that the shape is too familiar to be a coincidence. And sincerity in debates like this is not rare, it is common. The mind is not trying to lie. It is trying to settle. In a chamber like this, settling feels like safety. Safety feels like warmth. Warmth feels like sleep. And so the mind chooses an interpretation that gives it that warmth. But the temple itself is not choosing the interpretation. The temple is offering conditions. It is offering darkness and restricted space and authoritative stone and dense imagery that resists quick translation. It is offering the perfect environment for modern certainty to bloom. And certainty blooms best in low light. That's the irony. People often think more light would solve the problem, but in a way, more light would simply change the type of certainty. The debate doesn't exist because the relief is hidden. It exists because the relief sits at the border between familiar and foreign. More light won't change that border. It will just sharpen the details people use to defend whichever side they already prefer. So the argument stays alive because the temple is alive in a particular way. Not alive like a person, but alive like a stage that keeps producing the same play with new actors. Every visitor walks in with a different mental library, and the relief obligingly becomes a new script. The temple doesn't resolve the story. They host it, and hosting is what temples do best. They host gods. They host rituals. They host the idea that unseen forces can be organized and contained. They host human need for meaning, need for order, need for explanation, need for a sense that the world is intelligible. So the relief becomes less about what it shows, and more about what people need it to mean. The ancient technology reader needs the past to be surprisingly modern. The symbolic reader needs the past to be coherently ancient. The skeptic needs the present to stop being gullible. The believer needs the present to stay curious. Everyone points at the same stone, and everyone is really pointing at their own hunger, and the temple, being a temple, does not correct anyone. It does not flash a caption. It does not provide a neat closing statement. It simply stays cool and quiet, and it lets your mind continue doing what minds do in sacred spaces, searching, translating, settling, searching again. So you stand there and you notice the environment as part of the story, the narrowed corridor, the low light, the hush, the slow breath of limestone. The feeling that you have walked into a room where people once took symbols seriously enough to carve them permanently. And in that environment, you understand why theories keep appearing, because temples do not only show images, they shape attention, they make the mind lean forward, they make uncertainty feel charged, they make familiar silhouettes feel like messages, they make you want to decide, to interpret, to claim. And as your eyes rest on the carved scene, once more you can let that desire soften into something gentler, an acceptance that the temple is not asking you to win an argument, only to notice how easily a human mind turns mystery into certainty when the room is dark enough to make certainty feel like a torch. The wall doesn't really care what you call it, and that is part of its talent. It does not flinch when someone says bulb, and it does not glow with pride when someone says symbol. It stays limestone, patient and cool, with its carved lines doing what carved lines have always done. Catching light, losing light, keeping their shapes anyway. You can stand close enough to see the tiny chisel marks, little decisions in stone, like a careful handwriting you can't quite read. The surface is never perfectly smooth. It has the faintly pebbled texture of something that used to be alive, something that once slept under ancient water and now sleeps under ancient roofs. If you let your eyes relax, the relief stops being a picture and becomes a landscape, bridges and shallow valleys, raised outlines that guide your attention the way a riverbank guides water. And this is what the wall does best. It guides attention without forcing an ending. In modern life, almost everything you look at comes with a conclusion attached. A headline has a point. A diagram has a label. A product has a manual. A video has a comment section prepared to tell you what you should feel. Even arguments often come pre-packaged with a winning position, like a board game where someone has already hidden the rules under the table. But the wall isn't built like that. It does not give you closure. It gives you something better for late-night minds. It gives you a place to rest your curiosity without having to solve it, because the relief can be precise without being literal. It can be careful without being technical. It can be powerful without being a machine. Ancient Egyptian temple art often lives in that strange zone where exactness and symbolism overlap. The figures are not casual. The placement is not casual. The repetition is not casual. Yet the purpose of that carefulness is not always to describe a physical object the way a modern instruction booklet would. The carefulness is often about relationships, who faces whom, who holds what appears above, what appears below, what is enclosed, what is supported, what is attended. So you stand there and your eyes do what eyes do. They measure. They compare. They trace the long oval. They follow the serpent line. They notice the support. They notice the attending figures, how they appear practiced, as if they are doing something they have done 1,000 times, because perhaps, in a ritual sense, they have. And the wall rewards that noticing, not with an answer, but with a feeling, yes, it matters that you're looking carefully. That feeling is enough to make an argument start. Because once something feels like it matters, the mind wants to know what kind of matter it is. A matter of engineering, a matter of myth, a matter of ritual, a matter of metaphor. The mind is like a polite guest who has arrived at a party and wants to know the dress code, except the party is ancient and the host is a stone surface with excellent manners and absolutely no interest in clarifying anything. So the wall keeps breathing. Not literally, of course. It doesn't inhale. It doesn't exhale. But it keeps producing the sensation of breathing in you. You lean in, you lean back. You focus, you soften. You try a reading, then you let it go. Your attention expands. Your attention contracts. The wall becomes a slow rhythm for your mind, like a tide that doesn't ask whether you believe in the ocean. What the wall actually does best is sit on the border between familiar and foreign. It's familiar enough to hook you. There are shapes you recognize as container, line, support, figure, gesture. There is the basic grammar of scenes, something central, something attending, something held, something enclosed. Your brain likes that. Your brain relaxes when it can organize a view into parts. It feels less lost, but it's foreign enough to prevent an easy landing. The proportions, the conventions, the theological logic behind what belongs together, these are not the default settings of a modern mind. And that means your attention keeps slipping and catching, like a sock on smooth stone. You can't fully settle into certainty, but you can't fully dismiss the image either. So it stays alive in the only way a wall can stay alive, by remaining just unresolved enough to keep receiving new interpretations. If it were obviously one thing, people would stop talking about it. If it were obviously nothing, people would also stop talking about it. The wall's peculiar strength is that it refuses both boredom and closure. It gives you enough structure to invite meaning and enough ambiguity to keep meaning moving. There is a quiet, sleepy irony here. People think the controversy is created by the image itself, as if the relief woke up one day and decided to start trouble. But controversy is often an interaction, not an object. It happens when a human mind meets an object that can support more than one story. The wall doesn't create the argument. It provides an arena sturdy enough to host it for a very long time. And stone is excellent at hosting long-term projects. You can feel the time in the material. The relief is not fragile. It doesn't vanish when you blink. It doesn't scroll away. It doesn't refresh. It doesn't ask you to accept cookies. It simply waits, like a very old librarian who does not chase you through the aisles, but also does not answer questions unless you have learned the language of the catalog. In that waiting, the wall becomes a kind of training device for attention. Modern attention is used to being rewarded quickly. Look at something, get a point, click a thing, receive a conclusion. Identify a shape, feel smart. But the wall trains a slower skill, looking without instant reward. It asks your eyes to stay with it. It asks your mind to tolerate not knowing. It asks you to keep your curiosity gentle instead of aggressive. That's rare. And rare things make people emotional. Some people respond to that slowness by leaning into mystery. They let the image remain a symbol, a ritual statement, a theological scene. They accept that an ancient temple wall can speak in a language where precision does not mean literal object. In that approach, the wall becomes a lesson in how art can be exact without being technical, how a carved scene can be carefully constructed to carry power and meaning without needing to be a diagram. Other people respond to that slowness by seeking a shortcut to certainty. They want the relief to behave like evidence in a modern sense. They want it to point to a device, a mechanism, a technology. It's not always a desire to be sensational. Sometimes it's simply a desire to make the past feel readable. A device is readable. A device is familiar. A device does not require you to learn an entire symbolic worldview. It only requires you to recognize parts. And you can understand why that recognition feels soothing. The mind likes when unfamiliar things suddenly become familiar. It feels like turning on a lamp in a dark room. It feels like relief, which is an amusing word here because you are literally looking at a relief. But the wall does not quite allow the lamp to stay on. Even if you see the bulb, you are still in a temple. You are still in a space made for gods, not gadgets. You are still surrounded by imagery that refuses to behave like modern technical illustration. So the certainty has to be defended, reinforced, argued for. And defending a certainty is one of the surest ways to make it feel important. Meanwhile, the wall continues doing its best work, keeping attention alive. It does this by being physically present. You can't reduce it to a single screenshot in your mind, even if you try. The relief is part of the architecture. It belongs to the room. It has height, weight, distance. You can step back and watch the forms flatten into silhouettes. You can step forward and watch them break into texture and tool marks. Your interpretation changes with your body's position, which is something modern screen life often forgets. And when interpretation changes with your position, you become aware softly. Slowly, that interpretation is not a single truth you extract. It is a relationship you participate in. That awareness can be calming if you let it be. You can also notice how the wall manages to be serious without being dramatic. The scene has gravity, but it does not scream. It does not perform suspense. It does not build to a twist. It simply exists in a steady ceremonial mood, the way a ritual exists. It's not a story with a climax. It's a statement held in place. And held statements are strangely comforting. They're like pillars. They don't move much. They let your mind lean on them. Even the idea that it wants to stop starting arguments can be turned into something gentle. Arguments are usually loud, but here the argument is mostly mental. It is the quiet kind that happens inside a visitor's head as they stand in the cool air and try to decide what they were seeing. It's the kind that doesn't require shouting, only a persistent itch of interpretation. The wall invites that itch because it makes you feel that something is being shown, not merely decorated. Temple walls are not just walls. They are surfaces where a worldview is stabilized. The images are part of a structure of meaning. They are not random art. They are closer to a sacred grammar, a system where the correct arrangement of symbols matters. That system can make modern viewers feel as if they are looking at something like a code, because the scenes are structured, the forms are repeated, the relationships are deliberate, and codes in modern imagination beg to be cracked. But the wall's greatness is that it doesn't crack. It doesn't open like a safe. It doesn't reveal a final message. It just keeps offering the same carved forms, which means every new viewer must supply their own interpretive key. That's why the mystery keeps breathing. The wall is an engine for recurring attention, not a dispenser of definitive answers. If you listen closely, quietly, in your own head, you can notice how your mind wants to do something with the image. It wants to label it. It wants to categorize it. It wants to settle it into a file. And then you can notice, just as quietly, that you don't have to. You can let the wall be what it is, a carved scene in a temple, precise and patient, capable of holding multiple readings without collapsing into any one of them. This is, in its own gentle way, a kind of ancient wisdom. Not because the ancients intended to teach modern viewers about internet debates, but because the art itself embodies a skill modern minds often lack, the ability to sit with meaning that is strong but not closed. The relief succeeds at one thing over and over. It holds attention without giving it closure. That is not a failure. That is a function. It keeps starting arguments because it keeps starting attention. It keeps starting the impulse to interpret. It keeps starting the desire to make the foreign familiar. It keeps starting the longing to find something solid in the middle of uncertainty. And the wall does this without moving, without speaking, without changing its mind, which is frankly an impressive level of calm. It is a master of quiet persistence. It simply remains itself, and your mind does the rest. If you step back again, the image becomes simpler lines and shapes and figures arranged with the steady confidence of a tradition that knows exactly how it wants to be seen. If you step forward again, the simplicity breaks into detail, and the detail breaks into texture, and the texture breaks into time. And somewhere in that slow shifting from silhouette to surface and back, you can feel what the wall is actually offering you. Not a verdict, but a steady place to rest your gaze, a place where curiosity can stay awake without becoming anxious, and where uncertainty can feel less like a problem and more like a soft, persistent glow that doesn't need to be explained in order to be real. Imagine the chamber again, as if you never truly left it, only blinked, and the limestone waited politely for your eyes to return. The air is cool in the way stone is cool, not dramatic, not punishing, just quietly certain. Your torchlight moves like a careful animal, hesitant to touch the walls too hard, because the walls are old and do not need your excitement. The flame sputters once, then steadies, and the little hiss is swallowed by the room the way a whisper disappears into folded cloth. You notice how sound behaves here? It doesn't bounce so much as it settles. A footstep becomes a soft thud, then a gentle aftertaste. Even your breathing seems less like a bodily function and more like a small agreement you keep making with the air. In, out, and nothing about it has to be solved. The chamber feels close, but not claustrophobic close, like a secret held in two hands. Close like a book shut carefully so the spine doesn't crack. The limestone breathes in that calm, unhurried way that old surfaces do when torchlight runs across them. The wall is not smooth. It is honest about its grain. It has tiny ridges where a chisel stopped and started, and faint waves where a hand kept a rhythm. There are spots where the stone looks slightly glossy, as if many lamps and many eyes have polished it over centuries, and other spots where the surface is dry and matte, like a whispered sentence no one repeats. And then there is the image, the one people can't stop talking about, the one that makes modern minds lean forward as if leaning could change what's carved. It sits there with the confidence of any relief. It does not argue, it does not persuade, it does not adjust itself to your century. It simply is. But your torchlight makes it feel alive, because torchlight turns everything into a performance, even a wall. The flame flickers and the line becomes a contour. A contour becomes a shape. A shape becomes something your brain is tempted to name. You could stand here for a long time and never find the single correct posture for looking. Tilt the torch a little and the carving seems deeper. Hold it higher and the shadows soften and the whole thing feels flatter, calmer, less insistent. Bring the light close and you can see the tiny chisel marks like fingerprints, small repeated taps that say very quietly. A human hand did this slowly on purpose with patience that would make modern people check their notifications out of habit. The stone records labor in a way paper never can. There's sit in places, a faint darkening tucked into corners and grooves, like the room remembers every flame that visited. If you look closely, you can imagine the slow accumulation, lamps burning not with cinematic drama, but with routine. The kind of routine that has always existed. Someone brings oil, someone trims a wick, someone sighs and keeps going. In that routine, a wall becomes familiar, and familiar things gain nicknames. A shape becomes the bulb, because that is what your century calls it, and because naming something is the first step to pretending you understand it. But tonight, quietly, gently, you don't have to understand it. That can be the oath. You can allow the image to remain what it has always been, carved lines in limestone, arranged with intention, used in a context that belonged to its own world. You can let the relief exist without turning it into a courtroom exhibit. The chamber is already doing the work of calming you. The air is already telling you you can stop chasing. It's strange, really, how often certainty arrives wearing the costume of a simple shape. People see an oval enclosure and want it to be a glass vessel. They see something like a serpent and want it to be a filament, because filament is a modern word with a satisfying click to it, like a switch. They see a support and want it to be a socket, because sockets belong to the world where objects behave. And when you can map a wall carving onto something you beheld in your hand, something you bought, replaced, complained about, it feels like time collapses into a neat little trick. That feeling is warm. It's comforting in a slightly mischievous way. It tells you the past is not foreign. It tells you ancient people were just like you, except perhaps with better posture and fewer screens. And then, because the feeling is warm, you want to keep it. You want to repeat it. You want to defend it. You want to argue for it the way people argue for the best kind of bread or the correct way to load a dishwasher, with too much confidence and not enough sleep. The chamber does not care. The chamber has been here long enough to watch countless confident minds arrive, declare victory, and leave. It has seen people come in with reverence, and people come in with suspicion, and people come in mostly because they were nearby and someone said, "You have to see this." The stone receives them all the same way. It keeps its quiet. It does not reward the loudest interpretation. If you let your torchlight linger along the carved lines, you can notice how the relief is both precise and ambiguous. That combination is what makes it such a perfect generator of arguments. A thing that is sloppy can be dismissed. A thing that is too clear can be filed away. But a thing that is careful and still uncertain, careful and still open, becomes a machine that produces stories. It is the borderland, the sweet spot where imagination works hardest, especially late at night when the mind is tired enough to be creative and stubborn enough to be sure. And late at night, the mind does something else too. It tries to make peace. It tries to reduce its workload. It wants fewer loose ends, fewer hanging threads. It wants to tidy the world, like smoothing a blanket over a restless bed. That impulse is not silly, it is human. It is also occasionally the reason the bulb refuses to die as an idea, because the bulb is a tidy answer. It takes a complex religious environment, a dense symbolic language, a space designed for trained eyes, and it turns it into a familiar object. Technology. Technology is tidy. Technology is something you can picture. Technology is something you can buy or repair. Technology feels like closure, but the wall does not offer closure. The wall offers presence. It offers carved attention. It offers the very old fact that people have always built meaning into images, and that images can hold multiple meanings without collapsing. If you've ever stared at a cloud and seen a ship, then a lion, then a face, you already understand the basic mechanism. The cloud didn't change. Your attention changed. The chamber is a giant cloud made of stone, and your torch is the moving highlight that keeps your attention shifting. There is also the simple seduction of a good story. Ancient technology is a story with a clean plot. It has a mystery, a hidden knowledge, a modern rediscovery, and an implied insult to mainstream experts. It makes the listener feel like they are waking up. Waking up is a very popular feeling. It's also, ironically, the opposite of what we're doing right now. Right now, you're doing the slow unwaking. You're letting the mind loosen its grip. You're re-letting the chamber teach you a different kind of power. Not the power of having the answer, but the power of being able to stop asking for a moment. So here is your bedtime oath, spoken quietly, not like a vow shouted from a mountaintop, but like a promise made while adjusting a pillow. You don't have to solve this picture tonight. You don't have to win an argument with someone who is NT even in the room. You don't have to be the kind of person who has a definitive stance on a relief. You can be the kind of person who looks, notices, and then lets the noticing fade. You can notice the way the carved lines hold the torchlight. Some lines catch the light and turn sharp, almost metallic in their brightness, and others remain soft, absorbing the glow. You can notice the little imperfections, a tiny chip where a corner broke long ago, a slightly uneven groove where the chisel slipped, a place where a line is thicker because the carver corrected it. Those details are not evidence of anything grand. They are evidence of time and hands. They are evidence of the ordinary reality behind every mystery. You can notice how your own mind behaves. It wants to label. It wants to compare. It wants to say, "That looks like," and then finish the sentence with something from your life. That's fine. Let it do that gently, the way you let a child talk themselves to sleep. The mind can say, "That looks like a bulb." Then you can say back quietly, "Maybe," or maybe it looks like a sacred enclosure. Or maybe it looks like a story I don't speak fluently. You don't have to choose one. You can hold the possibilities the way you hold warm water in your hands, not tightly because it will run away, but carefully because it's pleasant. The relief continues to do what it does best. It holds attention without giving it closure. It does this with a kind of gentle stubbornness. It refuses to become only one thing. It refuses to be reduced to a diagram. It refuses to apologize for being symbolic. And symbols, if you let them, can be deeply calming. A symbol does not demand you fix it. A symbol does not demand you prove it. A symbol can simply sit beside you like a quiet companion. In this chamber, symbols and machines aren't enemies. They are just different languages for talking about power. Modern people talk about power with wires and circuits and devices because devices are our everyday miracles. Ancient people talked about power with gods and serpents and enclosures because those were the shapes their world offered for the unseen. When you translate one world into the other, you can do it clumsily and loudly, or you can do it softly and with care. Tonight you get to choose the soft version. The soft version says, this carving meant something to someone, in a place where ritual and art and authority braided together. The soft version says, your brain is very good at finding familiar silhouettes, and that skill is useful for survival and also occasionally responsible for internet debates. The soft version says, it's okay to be intrigued. It's also okay to be sleepy. Intrigue and sleep can share a room, as long as intrigue speaks quietly. Your torchlight is steady now, but the flame still moves a little because flames are never perfectly obedient. It throws a small shadow that crawls along the wall, and the crawling makes the carved scene feel like it's breathing. Not breathing as in alive, but breathing as in present, like a thing that occupies space and time. The limestone stays cool. The air stays still. Somewhere deeper in the temple, the darkness rests in layers, thick and patient. You could imagine the arguments happening outside this room. You could imagine voices rising, hands gesturing, people saying obviously and clearly, as if those words were keys. You could imagine the same image printed on screens, cropped, zoomed, annotated, turned into thumbnails, turned into slogans. And then you can imagine those voices fading as you step back into the chamber's quiet. The chamber is not impressed by the word obviously. The chamber has been alive with human certainty for a long time. It has survived all of it. If you want, you can take a slow walk along the wall with your eyes, tracing a line as if you're reading. The line curves, and your gaze follows. Your gaze is slower than usual here. It has permission to be slow. The wall does not scroll. It does not refresh. It does not provide related content. It just waits. That alone is almost worth the trip. Somewhere near the carving, there might be small details you didn't notice at first. A tiny figure carved with practiced seriousness, a gesture frozen mid-ritual, a symbol that only makes sense if you spent years learning the visual vocabulary. Those details are like the fine print on a contract, except no one is forcing you to sign anything. You can simply acknowledge that there is more here than you can hold in one glance. That acknowledgement can be restful. It can release you from the burden of pretending you have to understand everything immediately. And that is the heart of the bedtime oath. You are allowed to let the unsolved remain unsolved. Not because you don't care, but because caring does not always mean conquering. Sometimes caring means sitting with a thing patiently, letting it be complicated, letting it be old, letting it be stubbornly itself. The relief has earned that respect by surviving. It has endured hands and dust and time and attention. It can endure your uncertainty too. So tonight, let the bulb be what it has always been in the most practical sense. A carved shape on a wall, a meeting point between your imagination and someone else's intention. Let it be a symbol of gentle uncertainty, not a problem you must win. Let the torchlight be soft. Let the limestone be cool. Let the carved lines remain steady and unhurried. If your mind tries to tighten around the question, what is it really? You can loosen your grip and answer with something sleepy and honest. It is stone, and it is art, and it is meaning. And it is the human habit of seeing too much and too little at the same time. That's enough for now. That's more than enough for a night. The torch fades a little as the wick shortens. The flame lowers and the shadows grow long and gentle. The serpent stays carved. The oval stays carved. The attendants stay carved. The chamber stays cool. And the stone keeps its quiet.